The gunshot echoed through the Sierra Nevada mountains, just as Zara Emerson realized she had made the worst mistake of her life by accepting Marcus Dalton's marriage proposal. She ran blindly through the dense forest, her green traveling dress catching on branches and thorns, her dark blonde hair tumbling free from its pins. Behind her, she could hear the voices of Marcus and his men, their shouts cutting through the crisp California mountain air. The year was 1876, and she was 3 days' ride from Angel's Camp, somewhere in these God-forsaken mountains where Marcus had insisted they travel for their honeymoon before the wedding. Now she understood why he had wanted isolation. "When I marry you, everything your father left you becomes mine," Marcus had said just an hour ago, his handsome face twisted into something ugly and unfamiliar. "And if you refuse, well, accidents happen in these mountains all the time." Zara's father had died 6 months earlier, leaving her a substantial inheritance and a profitable mercantile business in San Francisco. She had thought Marcus loved her. She had been 22 years old and foolish enough to believe his pretty words and gentle courtship. Then, in their camp, she had discovered the telegram in his saddlebag, the one detailing exactly how much her inheritance was worth, and discussing the easiest way to ensure he controlled it all. She stumbled over a root and fell hard, her palms scraping against rough granite. Scrambling to her feet, she pushed deeper into the wilderness, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The September afternoon was cooling rapidly as the sun dipped lower, and she had no coat, no supplies, nothing but the clothes on her back and the small derringer hidden in her pocket that her father had insisted she always carry. The forest grew darker as she ran, and soon she realized she could no longer hear her pursuers. Either they had given up, or they were tracking her silently. Neither option brought comfort. She pressed on until her legs trembled with exhaustion and her lungs burned. Finally, as twilight painted the sky purple and gold, she found a small hollow beneath an overhanging rock face, partially hidden by thick brush. Zara crawled inside, making herself as small as possible. The space was barely large enough for her to sit upright, but it was hidden, and that was all that mattered. As darkness fell completely, the temperature dropped sharply, and she began to shiver. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent her heart racing. She had never been afraid of the dark before, but she had never been alone in the wilderness with men hunting her like an animal. The night sounds intensified. Something howled in the distance, wolves or coyotes, she could not tell. Closer, she heard the heavy footfalls of what might have been a bear. Her whole body shook from cold and terror in equal measure. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried to think of anything but her current predicament. That was when she began to sing. It was something her mother had done when Zara was a child, during thunderstorms, or when illness kept her awake at night. Soft, gentle melodies that wrapped around fear and transformed it into something bearable. Her mother had died when Zara was 12, but the songs remained. She sang quietly, barely above a whisper, an old hymn about walking through valleys and fearing no evil. The singing helped. Her breathing slowed, her shaking subsided slightly. She sang another song, then another, old lullabies and folk tunes that her mother had learned from her own mother back in Boston. Time passed in a blur of melody and darkness, and Zara did not notice when she gained an audience. Tobias Young had been tracking the elk for 2 days when he heard the singing. He froze mid-step, his powerful frame going utterly still in a way that only men who lived in the wilderness could manage. At 30 years old, Tobias had spent the last 8 years in these mountains, trapping, hunting, and trading with the occasional prospector or traveling merchant. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown deer and arms thick with muscle earned from splitting wood, hauling water, and surviving in country that killed softer men. His dark brown hair fell past his shoulders, usually tied back with a leather cord to keep it from his face. A thick beard covered his jaw, though he kept it trimmed short enough to be practical. His clothing was all buckskin and wool, well made and carefully maintained because out here, good gear meant the difference between life and death. He had been alone for so long that the sound of a human voice singing in the darkness struck him like a physical blow. But it was not just any voice. It was a woman's voice, soft and sweet and trembling with barely suppressed fear. Every instinct honed by years of solitary living told him to investigate, but carefully. Women did not end up alone in these mountains by accident. Tobias moved silently through the darkness, his moccasins making no sound on the forest floor. He had learned to move like the mountain cats, patient and precise. The singing grew clearer as he approached, and he realized the woman was hidden somewhere near the rock face he used as a landmark when hunting this area. He was perhaps a mile from his cabin, in territory he knew as well as some men knew their own homes. He stopped about 20 feet from where he judged the voice to be coming from and lowered himself into a crouch behind a fallen log. Then he simply listened. The woman sang old songs, her voice wavering occasionally but always finding its way back to the melody. He could hear the fear underneath the music, the way she drew breath too quickly, the slight tremor in certain notes. But she kept singing, and Tobias found himself captivated. He had heard men sing in saloons, rowdy drinking songs and melancholy ballads. He had heard native women singing as they worked, their voices strong and rhythmic. But this was different. This was beauty born from terror, courage wrapped in melody. He listened for nearly an hour, letting the songs wash over him like rain after a drought. Something in his chest, something he had thought had died during his years of isolation, stirred and awakened. He wanted to hear this voice every day. He wanted to know who possessed it, what had driven her into the mountains, and how he could ensure she never stopped singing. But approaching a frightened woman in the dark would be foolish and possibly dangerous for both of them. So Tobias settled in to wait for dawn, keeping watch over the hidden woman like a guardian she did not know she had. As the night wore on, the singing eventually stopped, replaced by the soft sounds of exhausted sleep. Tobias remained alert, his rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the darkness. Around midnight, he heard what he had been half expecting. Men, moving through the forest with far less skill than they probably thought they possessed. 3 of them, from the sound of it, spread out in a search pattern. "She cannot have gone far," one called out, his voice carrying too clearly in the night air. "Woman like that, she will be huddled up crying somewhere. Marcus wants her found before dawn," another replied. "Says we can split the reward 3 ways if we bring her back." "And if we do not bring her back?" the third asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "Then we make sure nobody finds her at all." Tobias's jaw clenched. He had suspected violence, but hearing it confirmed made his blood run cold. He was 1 man against 3, but he had the advantage of knowing this terrain and being a better shot than most men living or dead. More importantly, he had spent years hunting game that did not want to be found. Men were easy by comparison. He waited until the searchers were at their furthest points from each other, spread thin in their search pattern. Then he moved, silent as smoke, circling around to the eastern flank. The man in that position was young, maybe 25, and carried his rifle like it was a burden rather than a tool. Tobias could have killed him easily, but he was not a murderer, and he did not yet know the full story. Instead, he slipped up behind the man and brought the butt of his rifle down hard on the back of his head. The searcher dropped without a sound. Tobias caught him before he hit the ground, dragged him behind a boulder, and tied him securely with rope from his pack. A gag ensured silence. One down. The second man was older and more careful, but he made the mistake of stopping to light a cigarette. The flare of the match destroyed his night vision and pinpointed his location. Tobias approached from downwind, used the same technique, and soon had another trussed-up prisoner hidden in the brush. The third man, the one who had spoken about splitting the reward, was the most dangerous. He moved with the confidence of someone who had hunted men before. Tobias tracked him for nearly 20 minutes, waiting for an opening that never quite came. Finally, he decided on a different approach. He picked up a stone and threw it hard into the brush about 30 yards to the north. The man spun toward the sound, rifle raised, and in that moment of distraction, Tobias closed the distance between them. They struggled briefly, but Tobias had 50 pounds of muscle on the other man and years of hard living that had forged him into something harder than iron. The fight ended quickly. With all three men secured and disarmed, Tobias dragged them one by one to a clearing about a quarter-mile from where the woman hid. He built a small fire, more for light than warmth, and sat down to wait for them to wake. The first one to regain consciousness was the leader, Marcus, based on what he started shouting as soon as the gag was removed. "You know who I am. I am Marcus Dalton, of the San Francisco Daltons. My family has connections throughout California. If you do not release me immediately, I will ensure you hang for this." Tobias studied him with cold eyes. Marcus Dalton was handsome in a polished way, with carefully trimmed hair and expensive clothing now rumpled from being dragged through the forest. He was exactly the kind of man Tobias had learned to distrust during his years in civilization. "Tell me about the woman you are hunting," Tobias said, his voice rough from lack of use. He spoke little in his daily life, conversing mostly with himself and occasionally with his horse. "That is none of your concern. She is my fiancé, and she has taken leave of her senses. We are simply trying to find her before she hurts herself in these mountains." "That is interesting," Tobias replied. "Because I heard you tell your men to make sure nobody finds her if you cannot bring her back. Does not sound like a concerned fiancé to me. Sounds like a man who means murder." Marcus's face paled, then flushed with anger. "You misheard. You have no right to hold us here. We are simply searching for a confused woman who ran off." Tobias stood, his full height and breadth making Marcus flinch despite his bravado. "Here is what is going to happen. Come dawn, I am going to find this woman and hear her side of the story. If she confirms what you are saying, I will let you go with an apology. But if she tells me you are hunting her for reasons that are not honorable, I am going to make sure you and your men get escorted to the law in Angel's camp." "We clear." "You cannot do this," Marcus sputtered. "You have no authority." "Out here, I am the only authority that matters," Tobias said quietly. "And right now, I am the only thing standing between you and a very long walk back to civilization with no weapons and no supplies. I suggest you think on that before you speak to me again." He re-gagged Marcus and settled back to wait for dawn, his mind on the woman hidden in the rocks and the voice that had captured something in him he had thought was lost forever. Dawn broke clear and cold, painting the Sierra Nevada peaks in shades of rose and gold. Tobias left the three men tied securely and made his way back to the rock face, moving carefully so as not to startle the woman he knew was hiding there. He stopped about 10 feet from the brush-covered hollow and cleared his throat. "Madam, my name is Tobias Young. I have been watching over you through the night. The men who were hunting you, I have them secured. You are safe now. Silence greeted him. He waited, patient as stone. "How do I know you are not with them?" The voice was tired and hoarse, but still sweet despite the fear threading through it. "I suppose you do not," Tobias admitted. "But if I meant you harm, I would have taken you in the night while you slept. I heard you singing, madam. It was the most beautiful thing I have heard in 8 years of living in these mountains. I would not harm someone who could make music like that." More silence, then the sound of movement. The brush parted and Zara Emerson emerged into the morning light. Tobias felt his breath catch in his chest. She was beautiful, though clearly she had been through an ordeal. Her dress was torn and dirty, her hair a tangled mass of dark blonde waves, her face scratched and pale with exhaustion. But her eyes, a deep blue-gray like storm clouds, held intelligence and courage that shone even through her fear. "You heard me singing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, madam, you have a gift. I have not heard anything so fine since I left civilization." Zara studied him carefully, taking in his massive frame, his weathered face, the way he stood with his rifle held loosely, unthreatening. Something in his eyes, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his wild appearance, made her want to trust him. "Marcus Dalton wants to marry me for my inheritance," she said, the words tumbling out. "He brought me out here intending to force me into marriage or kill me if I refused. I found proof in his belongings. I ran and he has been hunting me." Tobias nodded slowly. "I heard them talking in the night, heard enough to know you were telling the truth. He and his men are tied up about a quarter-mile east. I need to know what you want to do about them." "What I want?" Zara blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" "Well, I can take them to the law in Angel's Camp. That is about 3 days' ride from here. But that would mean you testifying against a man from a powerful family. Could get complicated. What is the alternative?" "I send them on their way with no weapons and no supplies. Tell them if they ever come back to these mountains or bother you again, they will not walk out alive. Men like that, cowards at heart, they will run far and fast." Zara thought about it, exhaustion making her thoughts slow. "The law is the right answer," she said finally. "But I do not know if I have the strength for that fight. His family does have connections. They could make things very difficult for me." "Then we send them packing," Tobias said. "But first you need food and rest. My cabin is about a mile west. You are welcome to stay there while you recover and decide what comes next." She should have been afraid, going off with a strange mountain man to an isolated cabin. But something in Tobias Young's steady gaze made her feel safer than she had felt since her father died. She nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Young. I do not know how to repay this kindness." "No repayment needed, madam, just doing what is right." He shrugged out of his heavy coat and held it out to her. "You must be frozen. Put this on." The coat was enormous on her, smelling of wood smoke, pine and something else, something earthy and masculine that was not unpleasant. The warmth was immediate and blissful. Zara wrapped it around herself gratefully. Tobias led her to where the 3 men were tied. Marcus's eyes widened when he saw Zara, then narrowed with calculation. "Zara, thank God. This madman attacked us while we were searching for you. Tell him to release us immediately." Zara looked at him, this man she had almost married, and felt nothing but disgust. "I told Mr. Young the truth about why you brought me to these mountains, Marcus, about what you intended to do." "You are hysterical," Marcus said smoothly. "The altitude, the stress, it has affected your reason. Darling, we only want to help you." "Stop," Tobias said, his voice carrying an edge like a knife. "The lady has spoken. Here is what happens now. I am going to cut you loose and I am going to let you walk out of these mountains. Your weapons and horses I keep. You make it back to civilization on foot. And if I ever hear of you bothering Miss Emerson again, if I even hear your name mentioned in connection with hers, I will come find you, and you will wish I had killed you here." "You cannot do this," Marcus shouted as Tobias cut the ropes. "This is robbery, kidnapping. I will have the law on you." "Go ahead," Tobias said calmly. "Tell the law how you and two armed men got bested by one mountain man. Tell them why you were out here in the first place. I am sure they will be fascinated." He pointed south, away from his cabin. "Angel's camp is that way. Start walking. You have about a day before you run out of water, so I suggest you move quick." Marcus looked at Zara one last time, his handsome face twisted with rage. "This is not over. Your inheritance should be mine. We had an agreement." "We had lies," Zara said quietly. "Nothing more. Go, before Mr. Young changes his mind about letting you leave alive." The three men stumbled off through the forest, Marcus cursing and threatening with every step until the trees swallowed them completely. Tobias watched until he was certain they were truly gone, then turned to Zara. "My cabin is this way. Can you walk, or should I carry you?" "I can walk," Zara said, though her legs trembled with exhaustion. She made it perhaps 50 feet before her knees buckled. Tobias caught her before she hit the ground, sweeping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "No shame in being tired after what you went through," he said gently. "Rest now. I have got you." Zara knew she should protest, should insist on walking, but the warmth of his arms and the steady rhythm of his stride lulled her into a sense of security she had not felt in months. She let her head rest against his broad chest and closed her eyes. When she woke, she was lying on a bed covered in soft furs, a warm fire crackling nearby. The cabin was small but well built, with solid log walls and a tight roof. Everything was neat and organized, from the cooking supplies hung on the wall to the stack of firewood beside the hearth. Light streamed through two small windows, and she could see the peaks of the Sierra Nevada mountains framed in one of them like a painting. "You are awake," Tobias said from where he sat at a rough-hewn table, working on something with a knife. "I made some stew. You should eat." Zara sat up slowly, her body aching in a dozen places. "How long was I asleep?" "About 4 hours. It is early afternoon now." He ladled stew into a wooden bowl and brought it to her. "It is just venison and vegetables, but it will help." The stew was simple but delicious, and Zara realized she had not eaten since the previous morning. She ate quickly, then more slowly as her stomach adjusted to food again. "Thank you," she said when she finished, "for everything. You saved my life." Tobias shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Zara said firmly. "They would not have. Most men would have ignored a woman singing in the night or used the situation to their advantage. You protected me and asked nothing in return. That is rare, Mr. Young." "Tobias," he said, "if you are going to stay here while you recover, we should use first names." "And you are Zara, I heard him call you that." "Zara Emerson," she confirmed. "Of San Francisco, though I suppose I should say formerly of San Francisco." "What do you mean?" she sighed. "I cannot go back there. Marcus's family is too powerful, too connected. Even if I press charges, even if I tell everyone the truth, it will be my word against his. His family will destroy my reputation, possibly even my business. I have been thinking about it all morning. I need to disappear for a while, let Marcus move on to some other target." "You have family." "Friends who could help. No family. My mother died when I was young, my father 6 months ago. I have friends, but asking them to stand against the Daltons would be asking too much." She looked around the cabin. "I have money, savings that Marcus does not know about. I could buy property somewhere, start fresh." "Or you could stay here," Tobias said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Zara turned to look at him, surprise evident on her face. "Stay here. In the mountains. Temporarily," he clarified, though part of him wanted to say permanently. Winter is coming. Traveling will get dangerous soon. You could stay through the winter, rest and heal. Come spring, you can decide what comes next." "I could not impose like that," Zara protested, even as the idea appealed to her. Where else could she go where Marcus would not eventually find her? "It would not be an imposition. I have supplies enough for two, and I could use the company if I am being honest. 8 years is a long time to live alone." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You would have your privacy. I have a trapping cabin about 5 miles north. I could stay there, come by every few days to check on you and bring supplies." "Absolutely not," Zara said firmly. "If I stay, and I am only saying if, I will not drive you from your own home. This cabin is large enough for two people to coexist respectfully. We are both adults." Tobias felt something warm bloom in his chest at her words. "Then you will stay." Zara thought about her options. Return to San Francisco and face Marcus's revenge, or stay in these mountains with a man who had shown her nothing but kindness and protection. When framed that way, the choice was easy. "I will stay," she said, "through the winter at least. But I insist on contributing. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, whatever needs doing. I will not be a burden." "You could never be a burden," Tobias said quietly. Then more practically, "But I will not turn down good cooking. I am fair with a stew, but anything beyond that tends to turn out poorly." For the first time since the nightmare began, Zara smiled. "Then we have an arrangement, Tobias Young." Over the following days they fell into a rhythm. Tobias spent his days hunting, trapping, and gathering firewood for the coming winter. Zara organized the cabin, cooked proper meals, and slowly recovered her strength. They spoke little at first, both unused to company, but gradually conversation began to flow. Zara learned that Tobias had come to the mountains after serving in the Civil War, that he had seen things in that conflict that made civilization unbearable for him. He had needed silence and solitude to heal, and the mountains had provided both. Tobias learned that Zara had grown up helping her father run his mercantile business, that she had a head for numbers and a talent for negotiation. She had never wanted a traditional society life, had always felt more comfortable in the practical world of commerce than in ballrooms and tea parties. "My father used to say I had the soul of a merchant and the voice of an angel," she told him one evening as they sat by the fire. "He encouraged both, never tried to make me into something I was not." "He sounds like a good man," Tobias said. "He was. I miss him every day." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you came to the mountains? To escape missing someone?" Tobias poked at the fire with a stick, considering how much to share. "I came to escape myself," he said finally. "The things I did in the war, the things I saw, they changed me. Made me into someone I did not recognize. I thought if I could get far enough from other people, I could find the person I used to be." "Did you find him?" "No. But I found someone I could live with, someone quieter, maybe harder, but not cruel, not broken." He looked at her, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. "These 8 years I thought I was content alone. Then I heard you singing and I realized I had just been waiting." "Waiting for what?" Zara asked, though her heart already knew the answer. "For you," Tobias said simply. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Zara knew she should be cautious, should protect her heart after Marcus's betrayal, but there was nothing of Marcus in Tobias Young. Marcus had been all polished words and hidden motives. Tobias was quiet strength and honest emotion, as straightforward as the mountains themselves. "I was so afraid that night," she said softly. "Alone in the dark, hearing things moving around me. The singing was all I had to keep the fear at bay. I never imagined someone was listening." "I will always listen," Tobias said. "If you will keep singing." It was not a declaration of love, not yet, But it was a promise, and Zara felt the truth of it settle into her bones like warmth after cold. The days grew shorter as September faded into October. The aspen trees turned brilliant gold, and the first snows dusted the highest peaks. Tobias taught Zara to fish in the cold streams, to identify animal tracks, to move quietly through the forest. She taught him to make proper bread, to appreciate music beyond simple survival, to laugh at silly jokes and stories. They were careful with each other, respectful of boundaries and propriety. Tobias slept in a bedroll near the fire while Zara took the bed. They maintained a polite distance, though that distance grew smaller with each passing day. One morning in late October, Zara woke to find the world transformed by the first real snowfall. Everything was covered in white, pristine and beautiful. She stepped outside, marveling at the stillness, the way the snow muffled all sound. Tobias emerged from the small barn where he kept his horse and the animals Marcus and his men had been riding. "Beautiful, is it not?" he said. "First snow always feels like the world starting fresh." "It is magnificent," Zara agreed. She bent down, scooped up a handful of snow and impulsively threw it at him. The snowball hit Tobias square in the chest. He looked down at it, then up at her, his expression so comically surprised that Zara burst out laughing. A slow smile spread across his bearded face, transforming him from intimidating mountain man to something altogether more approachable. "You know," he said, leaning down to gather his own ammunition, "that might be considered an act of war." What followed was the most undignified, joyful snowball fight Zara had experienced since childhood. They chased each other around the cabin, laughing and shouting, until Tobias caught her around the waist and lifted her clean off her feet, spinning her around. "I surrender," Zara gasped, still laughing. "You win." Tobias set her down gently, but he did not immediately let go. They stood there, his hands on her waist, her hands braced against his chest, both breathing hard from the exertion. The laughter faded as their eyes met and held. "Zara," Tobias said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." He cupped her face in his large, calloused hands with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "I have not courted a woman in more than a decade. I do not know the pretty words or the proper way to do this, but I know that hearing you sing that night changed everything. I know that every day with you is better than a year alone. I know that I want to hear your voice every morning and see your smile every evening for the rest of my life." Zara reached up to cover his hands with hers. "I came to these mountains running from a man who saw me as nothing more than a means to wealth. I found a man who sees me, truly sees me, and asks nothing but to share his life. Tobias, I do not need pretty words. I need honesty and kindness and strength, and you have shown me all of that. Then you will stay, not just for the winter, but for always." "Yes," she said, the word as easy as breathing, "for always." He kissed her then, softly at first, almost hesitant. But when she responded, rising on her toes and wrapping her arms around his neck, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of longing and promise and a future neither had dared imagine. When they finally parted, both were smiling. Tobias rested his forehead against hers. "We should do this properly. When the snow clears enough, we can ride to Angel's Camp and find a preacher, make it legal and binding." "I would like that," Zara said. "Though in my heart I am already yours, and I am yours," Tobias replied. "Have been since the moment I heard you singing." Winter settled over the mountains in earnest, and the cabin became a warm sanctuary against the cold. They could not travel to Angel's Camp for a wedding, not with snow piling high and temperatures dropping below freezing at night, but they did not need official sanction to build a life together. Zara moved her belongings to share the bed with Tobias, and they spent long evenings talking, planning, dreaming. She told him about her father's business, how she thought she might be able to arrange for a manager to run it while she stayed in the mountains. Tobias spoke of his trap lines, the trading he did with occasional prospectors, how he made enough to buy supplies but never wanted more than that. "What if we expanded?" Zara suggested one night as they lay together, her head on his chest. "Not a lot, but enough. You know these mountains better than anyone. You could guide people who want to hunt or fish. We could build another cabin, maybe two, and rent them to people seeking escape from the cities." Tobias ran his fingers through her hair, considering. "People would pay to come out here. Absolutely. The rich especially. They love the idea of wilderness as long as they have a warm bed and decent food at the end of the day. We would not be serving them exactly, more like providing the space and letting them have their adventure." "You have the mind of a businesswoman," Tobias said with admiration. "It could work. Would mean more building come spring, but I would not be opposed to it." "We could make a good life here," Zara said. "A real life on our own terms." "We already have a good life," Tobias corrected. "This would just expand it." As winter deepened, they found joy in simple things. Tobias carved small figures from wood while Zara knitted socks and sweaters from wool she found in the cabin's stores. She sang while she worked, and he would stop whatever he was doing just to listen. Sometimes he asked for specific songs, the hymns and lullabies he had heard that first night. Other times she taught him new ones, or made up silly verses that had them both laughing. On the longest night of the year, they exchanged gifts. Tobias had spent weeks secretly carving a music box, a simple mechanism that played a halting version of one of Zara's favorite songs. She was so touched that she cried, then kissed him until he forgot his embarrassment at his crude craftsmanship. Zara gave him a shirt she had sewn from fabric she had found stored in a trunk, tailored to fit his broad shoulders and long arms. But more than that, she sang for him, a love song her mother had taught her, and told him it was his alone, a melody she would never share with anyone else. Christmas came and went, marked by a small pine tree decorated with carved ornaments and a feast of roasted grouse and preserved vegetables. They held each other close that night, grateful for the unexpected gift of finding love when neither had been looking for it. January brought the hardest cold, temperatures that made even stepping outside an ordeal. They stayed close to the fire, wrapped in furs, and talked about everything and nothing. Tobias told her about tracking mountain lions, about the time he had survived 3 days buried in a snow cave during a blizzard. Zara shared memories of her parents, of learning to read ledgers before she learned to read stories, of the day her father had told her she was smart enough to run any business in San Francisco if she wanted. "You miss it?" Tobias asked. "The city, the business, all of that." Zara thought about it carefully. "I miss my father, and I suppose I miss the challenge of the work. But the city itself, the society, the constant need to be someone I was not. No, I do not miss that at all. You could still have the challenge of work here," Tobias pointed out. "If we build those cabins, create that business you talked about, you would be running it." "That is true," Zara said, brightening. "And we would be doing it together, building something that is ours." "Ours," Tobias repeated, liking the sound of it. "I've lived so long thinking in terms of mine and me. Ours is better." February brought the first signs that winter would eventually end. The sun stayed in the sky a little longer each day, and the snow began to settle and compact rather than accumulating higher. They began to make concrete plans for spring, sketching out where the additional cabins should go, what supplies they would need, how to spread word of their venture. "We will need to go to Angel's Camp," Tobias said. "Get properly married, establish your new identity in case Marcus comes looking." "Do you think he will?" Zara asked, worry creeping into her voice. I think he is a coward who moved on to easier prey, Tobias said firmly. But if he does come looking, he will find you are no longer the unprotected woman he tried to victimize. You have me now, and I protect what is mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have bothered her, but instead it sent warmth flooding through her. She had chosen this man, and he had chosen her, and there was strength in that bond. March arrived with the sound of melting snow and rushing water. The streams swelled with runoff, and the first wildflowers began to push through the remaining snow. Tobias and Zara spent their days preparing for the journey to Angel's Camp, a trip that would take 3 days each way under good conditions. They left on a clear morning in early April, riding the horses Marcus and his men had left behind. Zara rode astride, wearing a pair of buckskin trousers Tobias had made for her, far more practical than her torn dress had been. She had become a different woman over the winter, stronger and more confident, comfortable in this wild place in a way she had never been comfortable in San Francisco society. Angel's Camp was a rough mining town in Calaveras County, full of prospectors seeking gold and merchants seeking the prospectors' money. They found lodging at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who took one look at them and smiled knowingly. "Looking to get married, are you?" she asked. "We have a preacher, Reverend Thompson, fine man, performs ceremonies most Saturdays." "This Saturday would be perfect," Zara said. "I will let him know to expect you," Mrs. Patterson said. "And might I say you make a handsome couple. Not often we see true love around these parts. Plenty of marriages of convenience, but you two have a different look about you." Tobias flushed at the compliment, and Zara squeezed his hand. They spent the intervening days purchasing supplies, fabric, tools, everything they would need for building the new cabins and expanding their life together. Zara also visited the land office and filed a proper claim on the area surrounding Tobias's cabin, establishing legal ownership that would protect them from claim jumpers or unwanted visitors. Saturday dawned bright and beautiful. Zara wore a simple blue dress purchased from the general store, and Tobias had trimmed his beard and tied back his hair, looking almost civilized despite his buckskins. They walked to the small church hand in hand, Mrs. Patterson and her grown son serving as witnesses. Reverend Thompson was indeed a fine man, his ceremony brief but heartfelt. "Do you, Tobias Young, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward?" "I do," Tobias said, his voice strong and sure. "And do you, Zara Emerson, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward?" "I do," Zara said, tears of joy threatening to spill over. "Then by the power vested in me by the state of California and Almighty God, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Tobias did, thoroughly and with a complete disregard for propriety that had Mrs. Patterson fanning herself and chuckling. When they finally parted, both were grinning like fools. They signed the marriage certificate, Zara signing her new name for the first time, Zara Young. It looked right on the page, felt right in her heart. That evening they celebrated at the boarding house with a dinner Mrs. Patterson insisted on preparing as her wedding gift. Other residents joined them, and someone produced a fiddle, and there was music and dancing late into the night. Zara sang, her voice drawing a crowd from the street, and Tobias sat watching her with such open adoration that several people commented on it. "You are a lucky man, Tobias Young," one old prospector said. "I know," Tobias replied. "Every day I know." They stayed in Angel's Camp for another week, finalizing their business arrangements. Zara sent a carefully worded letter to her father's business partner in San Francisco, explaining that she had married and moved to the mountains, and asking him to continue managing the mercantile in exchange for a percentage of the profits. She signed the letter with her new name and gave a post office box in Angel's Camp as her address. She also made inquiries about Marcus Dalton and learned that he had indeed moved on, announcing his engagement to a banker's daughter from Sacramento just 2 months after his mountain misadventure. The news brought relief. She had been right about him being a coward, seeking the easiest path to wealth rather than pursuing revenge. When they finally returned to the cabin, it felt like coming home in a way San Francisco never had. They threw themselves into the work of building, spending long days felling trees, stripping logs, and constructing the first of the guest cabins. Tobias's strength and skill with an axe made the work possible, while Zara's planning and organization kept them efficient. By midsummer, the first cabin was complete, sturdy, and well built with a small fireplace and comfortable bed. They stood back to admire their work, sweaty and tired but satisfied. "One down," Zara said. "2 more to go." "We have time," Tobias said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "No need to rush, I know, but I am eager to see this dream realized." She leaned into him. "Our dream." They completed the second cabin by late summer and began work on the third. Word had spread in Angel's Camp about the hunting and fishing guides available in the mountains, and they had already booked their first guests for the autumn season. The prospect of actually sharing their sanctuary with strangers gave Tobias some anxiety, but Zara's excitement was infectious. "They will stay in the guest cabins," she reminded him. "Our home remains ours, and you will be in your element teaching them to track and hunt. You are a natural teacher, Tobias. I have seen it in how you taught me." She was right, of course. When their first guests arrived in September, a wealthy merchant from Sacramento and his grown son seeking adventure, Tobias found he enjoyed sharing his knowledge. The merchant was respectful and genuinely interested in learning, and his son was eager despite his lack of skill. Zara managed the domestic side, providing meals and keeping the guest cabins clean and comfortable. She sang in the evenings, her voice carrying across the clearing, and the guests were entranced. By the time they left, they had paid double what was asked and promised to return next year with friends. More guests followed through the autumn, and by the time winter closed in again, they had made enough profit to expand their plans. They would build a larger lodge for dining and socializing, keep the guest cabins for sleeping, and truly establish themselves as a destination. That second winter was even better than the first. They were husband and wife now, their bond deepened by shared work and shared dreams. Zara discovered she was pregnant in January, and the joy on Tobias's face when she told him made her cry happy tears. "A baby," he said wonderingly, his large hand splaying across her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Zara asked, though she could see he was. "I did not think I could be this happy," Tobias admitted. "I thought I would live and die alone in these mountains. Now I have you, and soon we will have a child. It is more than I ever dreamed." Their son was born in late summer of 1878, delivered with the help of Mrs. Patterson, who had made the journey from Angel's Camp specifically to assist. They named him Thomas, after Zara's father, and he was perfect, healthy and strong with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue-gray eyes. Tobias was terrified of the tiny infant at first, afraid his rough hands would somehow hurt the baby. But Zara showed him how to hold Thomas, how to support his head, and soon Tobias was as comfortable with his son as he was with an axe or a rifle. "He is going to grow up strong in these mountains," Tobias said one evening, watching Thomas sleep in the cradle he had carved. "He will know how to survive, how to track and hunt and build. But he will also know music and kindness and love. We will give him everything." "We will," Zara agreed, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. "And he will be happy because he will know he is loved." The years that followed were full and rich. The business grew steadily, their reputation spreading through word of mouth. They built the dining lodge, expanded to 6 guest cabins, and hired help from Angel's Camp during the busy season. Zara managed the books and the bookings while Tobias led hunting expeditions and taught wilderness skills. Thomas grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy, learning to walk and then run through the mountain meadows. When he was 3, his sister arrived, a tiny girl they named Sarah after Zara's mother. She had her father's quiet strength even as an infant, and her mother's gift for melody, humming before she could form words. "2 children," Tobias said one evening, holding Sarah while Thomas climbed all over him. "A full house and a successful business. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life." "Believe it," Zara said, smiling at the picture they made, her powerful mountain man covered in children. "You deserve all of this happiness, Tobias. We both do." More guests came and went, and some became friends, returning year after year. The Youngs became known throughout California as the best guides in the Sierra Nevada, but also for their hospitality, Zara's cooking, and the nightly concerts when she would sing for gathered guests. When Thomas was 5 and Sarah was 2, they added a 3rd child, another boy they named Daniel. He was the quietest of the 3, content to observe and listen, but with a quick mind that caught everything. "Our family is complete," Zara said, nursing Daniel while watching Thomas teach Sarah how to skip stones in the creek under Tobias's watchful eye. "It is perfect," Tobias agreed. "You have given me everything, Zara. This life, these children, this happiness. I still think about that night I heard you singing, how it changed everything." "I was so afraid," Zara remembered, "lost and cold and certain I was going to die in those mountains. Then you appeared, this gentle giant who asked nothing but to hear me sing." "I will never stop wanting to hear you sing," Tobias said, pulling her close with his free arm, careful not to disturb the nursing baby. "Every day I thank God I was in those woods that night. Every day I am grateful for the path that brought you to me." They watched their children play, the mountains rising majestically around them, and felt the deep contentment of people who had found exactly where they belonged. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, learning to track and hunt with the same quiet skill. Sarah developed her mother's head for business, keeping meticulous records of their guests and supplies even as a young girl. Daniel showed an aptitude for building, constructing elaborate structures from wood and stone. By 1890, Thomas was 12, Sarah 9, and Daniel 7. The business was thriving, and Tobias and Zara had added a comfortable addition to their original cabin, expanding it into a proper home with multiple bedrooms and a large living space. The original tiny cabin where Zara had first stayed was now used for storage, but they kept it maintained as a reminder of where it all began. One evening in late summer, after the children had gone to bed and the last guests had retired to their cabins, Tobias and Zara sat on the porch they had built, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "You ever regret it?" Tobias asked. "Giving up San Francisco, the society life, all of that," Zara laughed softly. "Not for a single moment. I was never meant for that life. I just did not know it until I came here. This is where I belong with you, with our children in these mountains." "I think about that night sometimes," Tobias said. "How many different ways things could have gone. If I had been hunting in a different area, if I had ignored your singing, if Marcus had found you first." But none of those things happened, Zara reminded him. You were exactly where you needed to be, I was exactly where I needed to be, and we found each other. That is what matters. Sing for me, Tobias asked, as he had asked countless times over the years. The song from that first night, the one about walking through valleys. Zara's voice rose into the mountain air, clear and sweet despite the passage of years. She sang the old hymn that had comforted her terror on that long-ago night, and Tobias listened with the same rapt attention he had given it the first time. When she finished, he reached for her hand. "I will never get tired of hearing you sing," he said. "It is still the most beautiful sound in the world, and I will never get tired of you listening," Zara replied, squeezing his hand. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved, Tobias Young." "We saved each other," he corrected. "I was just existing before you, just going through the motions of living. You taught me how to actually live again, how to love, how to build something meaningful." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside, their children slept safely. Around them, the mountains stood eternal and protective. Below, the guest cabins held people seeking adventure and finding hospitality. It was a good life, a rich life, a life neither of them had imagined possible on that night when a frightened woman's song had called a lonely mountain man out of the darkness. The years rolled on, bringing both challenges and triumphs. There were harsh winters that tested their resolve, summers when fires threatened the forest, and seasons when guests were scarce and money tight. But they weathered everything together, their bond growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. Thomas was 18 when he met a young woman from Angel's Camp, the daughter of the general store owner. Her name was Elizabeth, and she was practical and kind, a perfect match for the serious young man Thomas had become. They married in 1896, in the same church where Tobias and Zara had exchanged vows 20 years earlier. "Our son is married," Zara said wonderingly at the reception. "When did he grow up?" "Somewhere between teaching him to fish and teaching him to shoot," Tobias replied, watching Thomas dance with his new bride. "He is a good man. We raised him well." "We did," Zara agreed. "And he found someone who will make him happy. That is all we could hope for." Sarah showed no interest in marriage, much to the dismay of several young men in Angel's Camp. At 16, she announced her intention to expand the business, to advertise in San Francisco and Sacramento newspapers, to bring in guests from all over California and beyond. "I have been doing the numbers," she told her parents, spreading ledgers across the dining table. "We could double our capacity if we build another lodge on the North Ridge. The views are spectacular there, and we have the staff now to manage it." "You have your mother's mind for business," Tobias said proudly, "and your father's confidence," Zara added. "If you think it will work, then let us do it." The expansion was a huge success. By 1898, the Young Mountain Retreat, as it had become known, was hosting guests year-round, even offering winter activities like snowshoeing and ice fishing. They employed a dozen people from Angel's Camp and the surrounding area, providing good wages and steady work. Daniel, at 15, had designed and built much of the new lodge himself, with help from his father and the hired men. His talent for construction had only grown with the years, and he talked about studying engineering, maybe going to school in San Francisco. "You would leave the mountains?" Tobias asked, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. "Not forever," Daniel assured him. "Just to learn, to study, then I would come back and build even greater things here. Imagine what we could create with proper engineering knowledge, Father." "Your dreams are big," Zara said. "But we will support you in whatever path you choose." As the new century approached, Tobias and Zara found themselves grandparents. Thomas and Elizabeth had a son, another Thomas, continuing the family line. They built a cabin near the main compound, choosing to stay and help run the ever-growing business rather than strike out on their own. On New Year's Eve, as 1899 became 1900, 3 generations of the Young family gathered around a bonfire, celebrating the turn of the century. Guests joined them, and there was music and laughter and hope for the future. Zara sang, her voice still strong and clear though touched now with the richness of age. She sang old songs and new hymns and folk tunes, and everyone joined in the chorus. Tobias watched her, his wife of nearly 24 years, and felt his heart swell with love and gratitude. Later, when the celebration had died down and they were alone in their room, Tobias pulled Zara close. 24 years since we married, he said. 25 years since I heard you singing in the dark. It has been a good life, Zara. The best life, she agreed. And it is not over yet. We have many more years ahead of us. Many more years of hearing you sing, Tobias said contentedly. Many more years of you listening, Zara replied. They did indeed have many more years. They watched Sarah eventually marry, at age 28, a professor from Sacramento who appreciated her intelligence and drive. They watched Daniel go to school and return with a degree in engineering, immediately setting to work on ambitious new projects for the retreat. They welcomed more grandchildren, 6 in total, and saw the business they had built become one of the premier destinations in all of California. In 1910, on a clear autumn day when the aspens blazed gold and the sky arched impossibly blue overhead, Tobias and Zara celebrated their 34th wedding anniversary. They walked together through the forest, following old familiar paths, until they reached the spot where Tobias had first heard Zara singing all those years ago. It still looks the same, Zara said, examining the rock hollow where she had hidden. Hard to believe I fit in there. You were so frightened, Tobias remembered, but so brave. Your singing, it called to something in me that I had thought was dead. And your protection gave me a future I had thought was impossible, Zara said. We saved each other just like you always say. They stood together in that sacred spot, hands linked, hearts entwined, and remembered the night that had changed everything. Then they walked home, to the life they had built, to the family they had created, to the love that had sustained them through 3.5 decades. Sing for me, Tobias asked as they reached their porch, the familiar request that had punctuated their lives together. Zara smiled and began to sing, the same hymn she had sung that first night, her voice weaving through the mountain air like a benediction. Tobias listened, as he always had, as he always would, grateful beyond measure for the gift of her music and her love. Their children and grandchildren, hearing the singing, emerged from various buildings around the compound. They gathered quietly, not wanting to interrupt, just wanting to be part of this moment. This was the foundation of everything they had, this love between two people who had found each other in the wilderness and built an empire of hospitality and family. When the song ended, the family applauded softly. Zara laughed and curtsied, then was surrounded by grandchildren wanting hugs and stories. Tobias watched, his heart full to bursting, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. From broken soldier to mountain man to husband, father, grandfather, and businessman, he had traveled far. But the most important journey had been the one that brought him to a rock face on a September night in 1876, where a frightened woman's song had pierced his isolation and called him back to life. The years continued their steady march. Tobias and Zara grew older but remained active, still involved in the business, still taking long walks in the mountains they loved, still finding joy in each other's company. They celebrated 40 years of marriage, then 45, their love deepening with time rather than fading. In the spring of 1925, when Tobias was 79 years old and Zara was 71, they took one last walk to their special place in the forest. Tobias's steps were slower now, his powerful frame bent slightly with age, but he was still strong. Zara's hair was silver, her face lined, but her eyes still held the same intelligence and courage that had first captured his heart. "Sing for me," Tobias asked, settling onto a fallen log. Zara sang, her voice thinner now but still sweet, still capable of reaching the notes that mattered. She sang the old hymn, the one about walking through valleys and fearing no evil, and Tobias listened with tears running down his weathered cheeks. "I have loved you every day of my life," he said when she finished. "From that first moment I heard you singing in the dark. Every single day I have loved you more." "And I have loved you," Zara replied, sitting beside him and taking his hand. "You are the best man I have ever known, Tobias Young. Marrying you was the smartest thing I ever did." They sat together in the forest, in the place where their story began, and felt the peace of a life well lived, of love given and received in full measure. That summer, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, they celebrated 50 years of marriage. The whole family gathered at the retreat, which now sprawled across several acres and employed over 50 people. There was a grand feast, music and dancing, and Zara sang, her voice still able to quiet a room and touch hearts. 50 years, she said to Tobias as they danced slowly under the stars. "Half a century with you, I would not change a single moment. Not even running through the forest in terror," Tobias teased gently. "Not even that," Zara said seriously, "because it brought me to you. Everything that came after, our children, our grandchildren, this life we built, it all started because I was running and you were listening. I would run through those woods 1,000 times to end up here in your arms." Tobias held her closer, feeling the precious fragility of her in his embrace, and sent up a prayer of thanks for the woman's voice that had called him out of the darkness and into the light. They had several more good years together, years filled with family and laughter and the quiet contentment of two people who had found their perfect match. Tobias passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1928, at the age of 82, with Zara holding his hand. Zara grieved, but she did not break. She had their children around her, their grandchildren, the great-grandchildren who carried pieces of Tobias in their faces and mannerisms. She stayed active in the business, still kept the books, still sang in the evenings for guests. On quiet nights, she would walk to their special spot in the forest and sing the old hymns, imagining Tobias listening as he always had. And sometimes, when the wind was just right and the stars were bright overhead, she could almost hear him say, "I will never stop wanting to hear you sing." Zara lived to be 89 years old, passing away in the spring of 1943, surrounded by a family that numbered in the dozens. The Young Mountain Retreat continued to thrive under the management of their children and grandchildren, a lasting testament to the love between a mountain man and the woman whose singing had called him to her side. In the end, it was a story that would be told for generations, the tale of how Tobias Young had heard a frightened woman singing in the darkness and decided he wanted to hear that voice forever. How he had protected her, loved her, built a life with her that exceeded anything either of them had dared to dream. How two broken people had found each other in the wilderness and created something beautiful that would outlast them both. The cabin where it all began still stood, carefully preserved by the family as a memorial to their grandparents. Visitors could see the hollow in the rock where Zara had hidden, could walk the paths Tobias and Zara had walked together. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the aspens and the stars emerged one by one, people swore they could hear singing, soft and sweet, the voice of a woman who had once been so afraid and a man who had loved her enough to listen.